Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, most of you I can't see. You haven't got your screens turned on. Okay, well, good morning anyway, and thanks for coming to our forum today. It's the first West Midlands forum that we've done by Zoom, as you'll appreciate. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Andy Littlewood. I work for National Energy Action, NEA, based in the Coventry office, so I cover the West Midlands and host this forum. Now, hopefully you would have all received or you've seen, had a view of the agenda this morning. It has changed since the one that we first sent out. Been a few little alterations, a few tweaks here and there, but the main thing is when we, after the break at about 11:25, we were going to break out into breakout rooms. And the initial thought was that we would be talking about the effects of the coronavirus on our work. But since then, there's been this announcement from government about the Green Homes grant. And I think between us, we've probably talked out most of the ways that COVID is affecting us. So instead of that, we're going to be examining the implications and situations we might come across with regards to the Green Homes grant. So we're doing that. We'll be going to breakout rooms to do that at 11 or so. Some of the next couple of items will be pre-recorded from NEA. One is the Policy Manager, Matt Copeland, which is the fuel poverty update. And then there's the Connecting Homes for Health report from Jamie Lee Rosenberg. So without further ado, we'll get on with that. Oh, before I mention anything else, of course, we have a chat facility. So do please put any questions you have on chat. And at convenient moments, we'll try to address most people's questions, but obviously we won't be able to answer everything. So all questions that are needing answers will be circulated to everybody afterwards, together with a link to the recording of this forum. So anybody you know who isn't able to manage to be here today will be able to see the recording. Okay, does that make sense? Nod? Yep, that's brilliant. Thanks very much. So moving on to the NEA Fuel Poverty Update, Poverty Policy Update from Matt Copeland. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the NEA Summer Forum 2020 Policy Update. Today I'm going to take you through some policy developments that have happened recently. Before I get to that, you might be wondering how our work is being shaped by the pandemic, as COVID-19 has had such a profound impact on all of our lives, but also the policy landscape. We've outlined the impact in our recent webinar, which you can watch there, which also has input from Citizens Advice and Bayes and Energy UK. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth a watch, so I'd encourage you to click through. Okay, on to the policy update and some recent highlights. So we're going to talk today about our campaign for a green economic recovery, our work surrounding the impacts of COVID-19, our campaign for the warm home discount to be extended, some news on the prepayment cap and updates on off-chamber work on South Disconnection, and then a little bit on water poverty at the end. So firstly, the most exciting bit, our campaign for a green economic recovery. We joined with many other organisations in calling for the economic recovery package to be a green one, centred around support for energy efficiency. And our role there was really not just from energy efficiency, but to ensure that there was a focus on low-income, fuel-poor households in any economic recovery. Dozens of organisations have released reports, written to government, briefed the press, all sorts of public affairs-y type things to encourage such a scheme that creates thousands of jobs, reduces fuel poverty, tackles health inequalities, tackles regional inequalities, everything that government is looking for. We helped contribute to several of those. Many of you may have been involved in letters or reports and mounted quite a lot of pressure on Downing Street over the past month or so. The result of that is success. The government has announced a Green Home Grant scheme, and whilst we don't know too much about that at the moment, I've just bulleted there what we do know. So there'll be £2 billion overall for that scheme, and that scheme comes in the form of voucher grants. So for low-income households, there will be vouchers up to £10,000 at no cost to the householder. For other households, it'll be £5,000 with the government contributing £2 for every £1 the householder puts in. We expect half of the money to go towards the low income side of things. That was suggested by the business secretary. Haven't had that confirmed as of yet, but we think that is a pretty good base assumption at the moment. This is a huge success for NEA. We're incredibly proud of it. We're especially proud of the fact that the grants will come at no cost to the householder if they are classed as low income. That is something that we've heavily campaigned for, and we believe we moved the dial quite significantly on that particular point. I'd love to talk about this all day and sort of celebrate with you, but there's lots to get through and not enough time, so I'm going to have to move on. But yeah, this is certainly the biggest success we've had since I joined NEA. Something else that we've been doing over the past few months, and you may have seen our work on this, is looking at the impact of COVID-19 and how households have been affected by it. We've released 2 papers looking at impacts, one on addressing the impacts of the social distancing on energy consumers, where we looked at things like what support was available, was support being accessed and was it accessible, and then proposed some remedies for it. We then released a paper looking at debt during COVID-19 called The Gathering Storm, and that looked at the scale of the mounting debt in energy sector, but also the water sector as well, and included some proposals to firstly help households to ensure that they can pay the debt with sort of debt matching or payment matching schemes, but secondly make paying easier in terms of ensuring that suppliers weren't unfairly chasing debt. Additionally, we're running this year's fuel poverty monitor on the impacts of COVID-19 on fuel poor households. That's been collecting information from our staff, from many of you, through our call for evidence, and also through other stakeholders such as Westminster and the devolved governments, through interviews, and that will report back later this year in approximately September with some initial findings. Of course, it can only be very initial because it's very early, relatively speaking, and we'll continue to try and capture evidence on this, but we think it will be really apt to understand some deficiencies, some things that went well in the first lockdown, so ahead of a potential second lockdown, we know what could be done better. Onto all home discount. So throughout the last 6 months, you'd have heard me rabbiting along about this many times, I guess, but we've been campaigning for the warm home discount to be extended and expanded. So we've partnered up with this fabulous organisation called Fair by Design, and we released a report with them outlining the need for extending and expanding the warm home discount. And many of you would have been involved in this campaign. We wrote to the Minister along with 60 other signatories, asking for clarity on the immediate future of the scheme, but also some clarity on their plans with looking into the future. We think that a 1-year extension at this point would be apt, keeping the scheme as it is, but also that the government need to consider the longer term design of the scheme to make sure that more people can receive payments automatically, as opposed to the application procedure that happens at the moment, where it's a bit of a lottery. We've also engaged more broadly with Parliament, encouraging Conservative MPs to put pressure on BEIS to provide urgent clarity, and we've also asked and succeeded in getting the relevant minister in Wales, the Welsh government, to write to Westminster as well. So quite a lot of stuff going on here, and we're relatively confident we'll get this. It's just about maintaining that pressure. Next, Ofgem's work, and there's been 2 main bits of work as far as we're concerned over the past few months. Firstly, the continuation of the prepayment price cap. It's almost certain that this will now continue after the end of this year, when the current cap is due to end. So, as you may remember, The current prepayment price cap is distinct from the broader cap. It's one that the CMA brought in when they did their energy market investigation because of detriment specifically to prepayment customers. So we've argued that that cap is very different to the default tariff price cap and should be sort of kept separate, but Ofgem have decided that it will roll it into it, mainly to ensure that the costs of continuing price caps aren't exceeding the benefits. Broadly, this is good. We would have preferred them to be separate, but this still provides protection for prepayment customers, and it means that 4 million households who do have a prepayment meter and are on standard variable tariffs will continue to receive price protection for the foreseeable future and won't see big increases in their prices coming out of winter. Additionally to that, Ofgem have released their final consultations on proposals to help households that self-disconnect. Suppliers, if they follow through with the proposals in that consultation, which we expect them to, suppliers will have to monitor self-disconnection, so they'll have to understand which of their customers are self-disconnecting. They'll have to, all suppliers will have to offer emergency and friendly credit. Most do at the moment, all do, and all have to use ability to pay principles. All of this will be in licence conditions, so will therefore be enforceable. And we think that whilst this is stretching for suppliers, this isn't an easy task for them to do. Specifically, the monitoring side of things will be difficult for them to do. This is really welcome, and not only is it good for those customers who are on legacy prepay because it offers them greater level of protection, but also because this is difficult and expensive for suppliers to do, they will be encouraged financially to ensure that prepayment customers are prioritised in terms of getting smart meters, which is a good thing. The benefits of having a smart meter are much higher for prepayment customers than others. So overall, these are fantastic proposals and we can get right behind them. Lastly, a bit of stuff on our water poverty work. My colleague Jess has published a new report on the consistency of social tariffs in the water sector, and there's 3 recommendations in that report. One, that government should conduct a thorough review of social tariff guidance in consultation with water companies and stakeholders to make this report fairer for all. Secondly, there should be particular consideration given to alternative options for funding social tariff schemes. At the moment, it's a sort of cross subsidy where some of their customers pay for others to receive a lower tariff. We think there should be different ways of doing that, or considered at least. And then thirdly, government should prescribe some core eligibility criteria so there's more consistency across different water companies of who receives this level of support, because at the moment it's a bit of a postcode lottery. Yeah, so that's that water report. And lastly, this is what's coming up in the next few months. So firstly, we have an expected response from the government to the fuel poverty strategy, and we're pushing for that to be coming sooner rather than later. Secondly, as we talked about before, we're pushing for the consultation on warm home discounts, and that should be quite linked to the timing of the fuel poverty strategy because the two are so inherently linked. And then hopefully before the end of the year, we think it's autumn, but that's always a bit optimistic. The government's published a broader, longer-term heat and building strategy, which we hope will look at not only how to increase the energy efficiency of fuel poor and other homes, but also how those homes are heated, decarbonising the heating systems. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Although you can't hear me, thanks for that anyway. For me, at least, one of the real big deals in all of this is the, the price cap, prepayment price cap to continue, which will, as Matt said, which will help an extra 4 million homes be guaranteed a level playing field as far as continuing to pay an affordable amount rather than being subject to the vagaries of an SVT. But also quite interesting to hear that because of various licensing conditions that are going to be changing, or are going to be suggested to the energy companies anyway, because it might cost them more money. They will start prioritizing prepaid customers to get smart, which I think is a good thing. I think we'll all agree. So that's obviously encouraging here. So good news there. Right, I'd like to move on now to the next item, which is Jamie Rosenberg talking from NEA about the Connecting Homes to Health program. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Lee Rosenborough, Senior Research and Policy Officer at NEA, and I'm here today to highlight some of the impacts achieved and lessons learned as a result of our Connecting Homes for Health pilot research project. Before I go any further, I'd like to share Steve's story with you. Steve is a disabled war veteran. He suffers from PTSD. He lives alone with his dog, Baxter, whom he considers to be his closest friend in the world. Steve had to leave his job due to ill health. His income was drastically reduced and he had fallen into arrears with his mortgage payments. He was in dispute with the Ministry of Defence over the calculation of his war pension and he was living on universal credit. He had one inefficient storage heater in the living room and 2 portable electric heaters. He could not afford to pay his energy bills. He generally found himself sitting in the dark and cold at home. He would wear a pair of leather gloves to try and keep his hands warm, but that wasn't enough to prevent the pain creeping into his joints and causing him great discomfort. But he preferred to suffer the pain in his hands than to risk falling further into fuel debt. At one point, his universal credit payments were temporarily stopped. For days, he did not eat, but drank only water. Steve felt incredibly ashamed of the circumstances in which he found himself, and had progressively cut off contact with friends and family as a result. He did not want them to see him struggling and was too proud to stomach the thought of their pity or their offers of help. Feeling cold, hungry and isolated made it harder for him to cope with the symptoms of his PTSD. The only person he ever really saw was his dad, who was suffering from a terminal illness and lived nearby. 1 year after participating in the Connecting Homes for Health scheme, Steve is transformed. He has an efficient and fully working heating and hot water system and knows that he can stay warm when he needs it. Despite using his heating system more, his energy costs have reduced so much that he is now able to save money each month. He even has £500 in his savings account. He can afford to buy the food he wants and not just the bare minimum. He has even had help in securing a manageable repayment plan with his energy supplier and is gradually clearing the fuel debt that he had accrued before signing up to the scheme. His leather gloves are no longer needed when he's at home. His hands do not hurt anymore, and he can take regular hot baths to further help manage his joint pain. He feels financially independent and happy. Because he no longer feels hungry and cold, he feels as though he is in a better place mentally to be able to deal with the symptoms of his PTSD. His voice now sounds bright and upbeat, whereas before he sounded sad and forlorn and was prone to tears. He says that letting the NEA advisor into his home that day was the best thing that he has ever done. The scheme, he says, has transformed his life. It has given him health and financial independence and given him hope once again. The Connecting Homes for Health pilot research project aimed to test and measure the impact of applying health-based eligibility criteria to the provision of free gas grid connections funded through the Fuel Poor Network Extension Scheme and free first-time gas central heating measures alongside tailored energy efficiency advice and support funded through warm home discount industry initiatives on the health and well-being of vulnerable residents who are in or at risk of fuel poverty and at risk from cold-related ill health. The research element of the project was funded by Northern Gas Networks. The concept of proportionate universalism put forward by Michael Marmot argues that actions to tackle health inequalities need to be proportionate to the level of disadvantage experienced by different groups in society, i.e., the most vulnerable will need additional support. A mapping exercise was therefore designed and carried out for County Durham and Sunderland. This involved identifying GP practices within the 2 local authority areas that were showing a high prevalence of multiple cold-related ill health indicators according to the Quality Outcomes Framework, using a weighted ranking system. These were then overlapped with the Index of Multiple Deprivation rank, along with additional deprivation indicators, and fuel poverty prevalence at ward level in order to give each GP practice catchment area an overall health, deprivation, fuel poverty risk score. Postcodes falling within a 2-mile radius of each of the highest scoring practices were identified and given to NGN, who carried out an additional layer of mapping to identify which properties were off gas. A comprehensive desk-based evidence review was carried out to understand the relationship between cold homes and ill health and to inform development of the eligibility criteria for the scheme. The full review can be accessed on our website. The pilot needed to balance narrow eligibility requirements to capture the most vulnerable, whilst allowing for some flexibility to capture other households in need. So I'd now like to touch on some of the impacts that were achieved for households, starting with the impact on their home heating and control experiences. Before receiving support, 76% of participants were not satisfied with the temperature in their home. 1 year after, 100% were satisfied or very satisfied. Before, 59% were not satisfied with how easy their heating system was to use. Within a year, 100% were satisfied or very satisfied. 74% were not satisfied with the amount of control they had over their heating before receiving support, but again, 100% were either satisfied or very satisfied afterwards. While 64% were not satisfied with how well their house kept the heat in pre-intervention, post-intervention, 86% were satisfied. The experience of subjective fuel poverty was also significantly reduced amongst participants. Before receiving support, 93% of households were in subjective fuel poverty. Within a year, this had reduced to 5%, meaning that 95% of participating households were not in subjective fuel poverty after receiving support. 1 year on, 100% of participants said they were satisfied with the new gas central heating system. It was also now easier for 90% and cheaper for 68% to heat enough hot water for their needs, and 35% use more hot water than they did before. 91% of those who had solid fuel systems before said that heating water in the summer no longer made their homes too hot. The experience of Carolyn and Lynette highlights the importance of having access to affordable and reliable hot water. Carolyn lives with her teenage daughter, Lynette. Carolyn is partially sighted and suffers from multiple health conditions. She is also the primary carer for Lynette, who has chronic bronchitis and asthma and who suffers from chronic skin and joint conditions. The pair live in a private rented, semi-detached home. Before, the heating system did not work and would constantly trip out the electricity. It was extremely inefficient and costly to run. Nevertheless, she had to have it turned on all the time to make sure the house could be warm enough for Lynette. As a result, she was falling deeper and deeper into fuel debt. The immersion heater did not work well, and Carolyn struggled to fill a bath with hot water at any one time. When she did want hot water, she had to wait for up to 2 hours. This made it practically impossible for Lynette to use hot water to manage her joint and skin conditions in the way that she needed. When they wanted to bathe, they had to go to her grandmother or her aunt's home instead. When things got really bad, Carolyn would borrow money from her sister to cover the cost of her energy bill. The home that Carolyn had envisioned became in her mind an unsanitary place which represented danger, discomfort, and a risk to her own health and that of her daughter. 1 year on, and Carolyn and Lynette now have access to a working central heating system which provides them with as much heating and hot water as they need without having to worry about the cost. Their energy is cheaper, and they have succeeded in having some of their outstanding fuel debt written off. Lynette is able to have as many hot baths as her condition requires, and her respiratory symptoms are less severe when she is warm at home. Carolyn is now pleased that she doesn't have to worry about keeping the whole house warm all day. She feels relieved that Lynette now has access to a comfortable environment in which she can be homeschooled without risking a worsening of her respiratory illness. They've been able to decorate and take pride in the beautiful home which they've been able to create. Carolyn has told her landlord that, should they decide to sell the property, she'd be keen to have first refusal. This is the place where she wants to live and where she wants to stay. It is her home. Indeed, the project either made energy bills more affordable or did not increase bills for a large proportion of participant households. Before, for example, 70% had found it hard to afford their energy bills. After, 79% found it easy. Before, 35% felt that their energy bills were manageable, but this increased to 77% afterwards. Similarly, whereas before only 34% felt their household budget was manageable, afterwards 67% felt so. The intervention also had an impact on the self-reported physical and mental health and well-being of participant households. For example, before intervention, 14% rated their physical health as either good or very good. Afterwards, 74% did so. Before, 37% rated mental health as good or very good. Afterwards, 79% did so. Before, 83% said their physical health was affected by being called at home. Afterwards, only 7% felt that this was the case. Similarly, before, 48% had said that their mental health was affected by being called at home. Afterwards, only 5% felt so. And finally, whereas before intervention, 73% said that their ability to cope with an existing illness was affected by being called at home, only 5% said that this was the case afterwards. Let's take a look at May's story. May is retired and suffers from COPD. At the point at which she signed up for the scheme, her lung capacity was at 39% and she would be constantly wheezing and struggling for breath. May previously had a solid fuel heating system in her home, which she hated. It was difficult to manage and she struggled to fetch the fuel she needed from the outside store due to her breathing. She was convinced that the ash and the dust created by the system was contributing to her respiratory illness and helping to make her symptoms worse. Not only that, but it made her reluctant to have her young grandchildren over to visit. She worried that two toddlers running around the living room were in danger of suffering serious burns and injuries should they fall over near or get too close to the fire that was in the middle of the room. 1 year after, and her gas central heating system has been installed, and May was saving between £80 and £90 a month on her fuel bills. Not only did this mean that she could now afford to buy more food and other essentials, but also that she could allow herself a little treat every now and then. She was finally able to put money into her savings account each month, which made her feel content and secure. Her lung capacity had increased over the period of a year from 39% to 50%. When her doctor expressed surprise and pleasure at the improvement and asked her if anything had changed, she said that she told him that it had been down to her new gas central heating system. She said that she was warmer and that the system was much cleaner, and she no longer felt that she was breathing in harmful substances while she was at home. She did not have to struggle to bring fuel in anymore and could instead just enjoy the warmth and the financial savings. Her children had noticed that her chest no longer made a constant rattling noise and that her pallor had improved. She no longer looked grey. Furthermore, she'd been able to spend more time with her young grandchildren as she was now confident that they would not hurt themselves when playing in her living room. Instead of worrying about the dangers that her home might represent, she could simply enjoy being with her family. May felt as though the scheme had changed her life for the better and likened it to having won the lottery. Taken together, these results show that the application of the health-based and financial eligibility criteria and targeting mechanisms to the project was successfully able to reduce the experience of health and other social inequalities in extremely vulnerable households. However, the delivery pathways developed and enacted during the delivery phase of the project were also key in enabling such results to be achieved. Ultimately, preliminary mapping is important to identify target communities or areas, but that should be the start and not the end point of a successful recruitment strategy, especially when it comes to engaging and retaining the participation of extremely vulnerable clients. The reality is much more complex and much more expensive to deliver. In the case of this project, it meant repeated letters, phone calls, text messages, face-to-face home visits, door knocking, private and social landlord liaison. It also meant managing communications with local councils and parish councils and taking on board the processing of FPNES paperwork. Not only that, it meant organising and carrying out house clearances and storage space, coordinating the provision of small measures such as carpets and curtains, identifying and booking adequate interpretation services, and making onward referrals to other agencies able to provide additional support for multiple vulnerabilities. Ultimately, it's about fully understanding individual household situations and needs. At times, the application of a small crisis fund meant that the project was able to retain the participation of households who would have otherwise fallen by the wayside. Importantly, the retention of such households was achieved by spending relatively small amounts of money. The key factor was in staff taking the time to understand the barriers facing each individual household and creatively seeking out ways that would remove that barrier. The extra time and effort spent in recruiting and retaining the participation of vulnerable, hard-to-reach households was also necessary when securing gas connections for hard-to-connect properties, especially where legal complications can arise when having to seek permission to work on private land, for example. Challenges were encountered with regards to identifying whether a household had a meter point reference number, or MPRN, as well as in securing a timely gas meter installation. In this instance, for example, a company called Citrus Energy was identified who, as part of their energy advice and switching service, are able to secure first-time gas meter installations by comparing deals and installation timeframes between different suppliers. This secured a turnaround time of 10 days instead of 3 months to get gas meters fitted. The team were furthermore enabled to identify official minimum energy efficiency installation quality standards, and so produced an installation checklist that installers had to use to ensure works were carried out to the highest of standards, with appropriate quality assurance checks and visits then being carried out. It was also important to work with installers who understood or were able to be flexible in relation to the vulnerabilities of households. Our report sets out a number of both practical and policy-based recommendations to facilitate and enable the replication of the delivery pathways identified during the Connecting Homes for Health pilot scheme. Details of all the recommendations that we are making can be found in both the full report and executive summary. So that brings me to the end of a somewhat whirlwind tour of the project. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit the project page on NEA's website. You can also email NEA's research or policy manager using the addresses shown on screen. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, in your absence. That was most interesting. It was very complicated, lots of information, lots of statistics there. So I'd advise if you want to follow this up, then do have another look at that when it's circulated. I think there's a lot of stuff in there that it's easy to miss. I mean, something that struck me was the huge marked improvement regarding people in fuel poverty before and after the scheme. 73% in fuel poverty before the scheme, and after the scheme, 95% out, so 5% still in, and that improves as time went on. Also an interesting thing there was, Jamie mentioned at the end there, getting to know individual situations, getting to understand the customers, the clients, I hate those words, the household, the humans. Getting to understand the situation was really key to addressing their specific issues. You know, the lady with a coal fire or a solid wood fire whose breathing, her chest condition was made so much worse by the dust and the ash and having to go and fetch the coal. Something that we sitting in our offices in the Midlands that we're all on gas have no appreciation of, and I think it's a really important thing to bear in mind. And the other surprise I got from it was the doctor saying, "Oh, you're better. How did that happen then?" You know, much as we appreciate and know and realise the importance of the public health, etc., overlapping their agenda with ours, there's a long way to go before there's a full understanding. Anyway, that notwithstanding, I'd like to pass over to Rachel Jones now, representing variously ALIO and the West Midlands Combined Authority. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to endeavour to do a square share screen, so hopefully this will work. If everyone can see that, if you nod if you can see my shared screen, or at least I can. Oh, marvellous, excellent. That's brilliant. I can see you nodding, marvellous. Okay, I'm going to start off a little bit from the West Midlands Association of Local Energy Officers. I think many of you have heard me talk before. Essentially, we are an association of energy officers, predominantly local authority, housing association, but also we have a wider membership made up from the charity sector, energy suppliers, etc. And it's really about trying to offer support, best practice, guidance on what's good out there, what's working, and also equally what isn't working out there, so that we can hopefully offer some really good quality solutions for the communities that we serve, essentially. So I just want to give you a bit of an update. We had a conference, which happened to be on the same day that we had the big announcement. So it was a bit of a challenge because Bays, who were talking at the conference, couldn't actually say an awful lot because this was in the morning and the afternoon was due to be when the Chancellor was making his sort of big budget sort of announcements. We were also hoping to have Lord Deben speaking as well, but we had quite a few technical issues, I think one can safely say, the joys of technology, and we were trialling, we weren't using Zoom actually, we were using Microsoft Live, which has its own set of challenges when it comes to presenting, because you have to do it in a very particular way. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to present. He was hoping to get us a recording ready for today to show you, and it was due to arrive at some point this morning, but it still hasn't appeared in my inbox, so hence why you've got the pleasure of my dulcet tones rather than listen to what he has to say. But what we will do, as soon as we get that recording through, we'll put it onto the ALIO website so you can hear what he had to say. He's the chair of the Committee on Climate Change, and the ALIO conference that we had was very much about fuel poverty and heat networks, so we were really focusing on that agenda. So Bays spoke briefly about eco and obviously the fuel poverty strategy, as we've already heard a little bit about this morning. Really looking at eco 3 going forward, hoping to have some consultation on that back end of this year, early next year. I think the winter was the terminology, and a winter in government world can be anything, I think, from sort of October through to about March. So at some point over that period, there will be a consultation going forward on the next round of eco 4, which will be, they're calling it BECO, Beyond Eco is the next one. So we had a really good conference. As Andy said earlier, I have to say online does allow an awful lot more people to access the conference. So we are going to look to do more online conferences. But it was, when we did our sort of feedback, 40% of people said they really want to make sure there's more online conferences, but 60% did say they did miss that interaction, that meet and greet session. So we are going to try and make sure we, when it's safe to do so, have a conference where people can attend, and we can do a bit of networking and have some face-to-face conversations, well, face-to-face in a social distancing kind of way. But from that conference, we had a few actions that came out of that. And one was really around some direct liaison with Bays on the Green Home grants. We're going to talk a little bit about it later. Unfortunately, Andre, who was presenting, couldn't really talk an awful lot about it. So they're sort of finding their way through it at the moment. So we really want to make sure that people are accessing it, are able to access it. And I think we all want to make sure, all of us in this virtual room, make sure that that's done in a way that's most appropriate to fuel poor householders. Some of you may well remember the Green Deal external wall insulation vouchers way back quite a few years ago, where it did become a little bit of a bun fight, so to speak, and we really want to assure that that doesn't happen again, particularly with vulnerable households. So we're certainly going to be looking at feeding back to Bays on the importance of making sure that a house is assessed properly first, and there's appropriate measures that are installed in that household, hopefully leading to other measures, but initially it's about the appropriateness of the measure that's installed. The other action we really took away from that was really looking at a survey on, I hate the word shovel ready, but it seems to be the word at the moment, it's oven ready or shovel ready projects. So specifically, we were talking about heat networks, and there was quite a lot of discussion around local authorities, particularly over the last couple of weeks. I've had quite a lot of very quick asks from governments. So the LEPs, the local enterprise partnerships, have had letters both from Bays and also from the Ministry of Housing asking for energy efficiency based projects, what projects are ready to go. And so various local authorities are having to feedback on this. And what we want to really look at is trying to have almost a place to all those to be stored. So we're going to look to do a survey to the ALIO members about your shovel ready projects, so that, you know, we have them ready to go. So it's not constantly a last minute having to get things through as quick as possible. The other area we talked quite a lot about at the conference was around heat networks and about support available through the heat networks and through Bays. So we're really going to sort of try and pull that together. All the presentations are on the ALIO website, as is the recording and the questions that were asked to the director of the heat networks at Bays as well. And the other area that really came up was around the energy hubs. So some of you will be aware that there are 6 energy hubs operating across the country that were funded from BEIS probably about 3 years ago, really about working with the local enterprise partnerships. But at the moment, it seems that the energy hubs are going to be a bit of a conduit for funding. So potentially a lot of the funding that's coming through will be fed through the energy hubs. And we have one hub in the Midlands, which covers both East and West Midlands, which is based at Nottingham City Council. So it's really about trying to make sure we've got closer liaisons with the energy hub so that local authorities are better linked to that. At the moment, most of the links come through the LEPs. And as you will all know, you'll have a LEP which may include several local authorities, and it's just making sure all those linkages are there. The energy hubs are currently recruiting a fuel poverty officer, manager, I'm not sure what the correct terminology they're calling it, so they're currently recruiting that, but obviously that'll only be one officer per energy hub, and as it's East and West Midlands, that's a big area that person will be covering. So it's making sure that we as ALIO and all you around the table here are feeding into those energy hubs and making sure they're aware of the work that's been done on fuel poverty, really, so that we don't end up with any duplications or anything that's unnecessary going forward. So we're going to really try and make sure that structure's in place. There is a list of the officers that support each of the specific areas. So the Solihull Birmingham Energy Hub, there'll be a person currently looking at energy projects. Worcestershire certainly has one. So it's just making sure that we know, who all those different people are. At our next ALIO event in the West Midlands, we'll certainly ask the Midlands leads to perhaps say a few words so you can actually see who they are and how they might link together. And hopefully, more importantly, the fuel poverty person as well that's going to be covering the Midlands, hopefully will be in post in the next few months as well. So really just a bit of an update on some of the other ALIO areas. So we've just produced our latest newsletter, which is on the website, which is really a bit of an overview of some of the things that's already been talked about, but also the conference. As an organisation, ALIO is currently seeking charity status. So we're currently going through that process, which will enable us really to apply for funding to support more of you out there in the field. Particularly some of those of you that don't actually have charity status to be able to do that. We can be the conduit to make that happen. So we'll keep you informed of what is happening on that one. We are, as ever, looking for sponsorship. As you can imagine, it's it's never cheap to fund the running of a organisation. As ALIO, it is a challenge, so we are looking for sponsorship support. I know at this particular time that's a bit of a challenging ask, but even if it is help through support of our website or supporting the exec, whatever is out there. So if there's any businesses, energy suppliers even, on this call at the moment, I will take this opportunity to drum up some trade. For those of you that aren't aware of ALIO and would like to join the ALIO network, then Angela's email address there. Angela's our sort of main secretariat person. So there's an email address there of secretariat at ALIO. And the thing I did want to highlight is for those of you that are new to the joy of energy and the complexity of the policies, and we talk about it in the world of acronyms, particularly we talk about ECO, and it is, it's been around a long, long time, but there's a particularly good briefing paper that the House of Commons produced, I think about 8th or 9th of July it came out, something around there. I've put the link on here just because it's got a really good history of ECO, how it came about, the precursors to ECO, so SERP, CESP, EEC, the fact that essentially something's been around for probably the best part of 20 years now. Just to give you a bit of a background, it's a relatively easy read. It's only a few pages, but it is a really good introduction into what ECO is, where the funding initiated from around the carbon and how it's become around fuel poverty. It's got some rather nice sort of graphs on there as well. I've put one on here just because it is actually quite an interesting one about how ECO has changed over the last few years. It is notionally worth somewhere in the region of about 640 million is the budget for it. which is half of the projected annual spend, which was when they originally did the impact assessments of eco back in 2011, when they were expecting the spend to be £1.3 billion per annum. We're actually spending about 640. And you can really see there, just from looking at that slide, how the level of measures through eco have dropped from eco 1 through to where we are now. So I just really wanted to mention that to you, just because I think it's a really interesting document to have a read through. It's got quite a lot of links attached to it as well, but for those that are new to this agenda, and actually for those that have been doing it for a long time, it's a really good just overview of the whole process, and hopefully will give you a good bit of background when it comes to looking at BECO, or whatever we're going to call it, for Eco 4 going forward, or whatever that might look like in regards to energy going forward when the government starts to consult on that particular agenda area, basically. So that's me from an alio perspective. So
it's probably because I'm on a Zoom thing as well at the same time.
On that. So I can hear other people talking in the background there. So if you want to become an alio member, then please do just email us and we can take you through those processes of that as well for you. Right. I think it's probably easiest, rather than me de-sharing my slides, is to probably go on to the West Midlands slides, if that's okay with everybody else, from the combined authority approach to addressing sort of fuel poverty across the West Midlands. So some of you in the I'm going to call it the room for now, it's the easiest way of calling it. Some of you in your rooms will be aware of the work that the combined authority has been doing around fuel poverty. It really started about 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, where essentially people across the West Midlands who have been working on this agenda really wanted to look at how we can address it from a regional approach. How can we all work together better to get better outcomes for the people that we serve, the communities that we live in, and the communities we want to support. So we started to look at understanding the local picture. We know what the issue is around from a carbon perspective, but we also know that we are looking, before COVID-19, of over 300,000 people across the West Midlands living in fuel poor households. So a huge number of households out there that need support. We know now that that situation it could be double. We just don't know how bad those figures actually are. We know a huge number of people are in receipt of benefits, and people are at risk when they come off furlough of losing their jobs in the longer term. So it's really about what can we do as a collection of passionate people to address the issue from the West Midlands perspective. So we started to look, we had a conference back in February, I think quite a few of you may have attended, to look at the West Midlands proposition, which was about having a person-centred approach to addressing fuel poverty. Since then, things have moved on with the COVID-19, and it's really become about making sure we are prepared for winter, but also going forward, and about really trying to make sure there's a economic recovery proposition that supports householders, but also takes the opportunity to create jobs. So the Mayor has produced a document called Recharge the West Midlands, and within that was an ask around Warm Homes Save Lives, which is what we've called the programme, which is about tackling fuel poverty, really looking at the existing structures out there, and really about creating jobs. There's two elements of it really. There's the Warm Homes Save Lives, and then there's a larger, longer term retrofit package, really looking at securing a lot more jobs across the region. But what we're going to be talking about today, it's really about what we're calling Work Package 1, which is about Warm Homes Save Lives, which is £50 million programme to address fuel poverty across the West Midlands. So I'll take you through some of the key elements that we're looking at as part of that. So it's got quite a timetable to it, particularly in light of the COVID-19 situation, and trying to make sure that we are ready for this winter. We are, I think many of us, expecting there to be a second wave, hopefully not, but they may well be. So we need to make sure we are prepared as we possibly can, and really ready to support those that are very, very vulnerable going forward this winter. So there's been a number of meetings going forward, meetings with the Mayor, government announcements came out around the green homes grants. There's quite a lot of things going forward, and it's really about what can we do. So what we're trying to do from the West Midlands perspective is have a task group currently that's really setting up the processes so that we can have a model to move forward with. So I'll talk a little bit about work package 1, which is produced by SHAP. So many of you have heard of SHAP, the Sustainable Housing Action Partnership, which many of you will know Rosemary, who works tirelessly on this agenda area. So I'll talk you through what the work package 1's going to look like, hopefully, going forward. So it's a real step change. It's about jobs, it's about post-COVID-19, it's about economic recovery. At the same time, supporting and helping those that are fuel poor. So the idea, the key objectives of it are to address fuel poverty in the West Midlands regions and protect the NHS and save lives, whilst at the same time creating jobs and then demand for local companies. And if we can get it scalable, we can then move forward to a larger scale retrofit of existing homes. But we need to act now to make sure we're prepared going forward. And really to make sure we sort of stop any further economic consequences of what's going on. So it's really about building on the failures that we had in the past. So everything has been very much sort of pepper potted. There's bits of money here, bits of funding there. And it's really about making sure we put the person at the centre of everything we do is the key area of it. And it's about all of us working together. So it's about making sure we utilise the local supply chain. We make sure we're looking at interventions in people's homes that are based on robust surveys, are based on appropriate measures for that householder, which might be initially an emergency measure, but ultimately in the long term, it may well be a series of other measures that are required to support that householder. So it's trying to make sure we look at a whole house package, starting with what potentially might be a crisis situation. So we are looking at significant intervention at scale. So looking for initially 7,000 homes by the end of 2021. So for this winter, we would be looking at 1,000 homes. And then for the following winter, we'll be looking at 6,000 homes. And then every year for the next 3 years, we'll be looking at 6,000 homes per year. We're looking at very much based actually around the announcement, so £10,000 per household. As a group, as a task force, whatever you want to call ourselves, Fuel Poverty Task Force, we have looked at a lot of different models out there, particularly looked at Scotland and the model they've been delivering and some of the models that are happening the Greater London Authority. And that seems to be the average spend amount for a fuel poor household to really pick them up and to move them to a higher EPC rating and to try and move them out of fuel poverty. It's really about making sure we are working better with local authority intelligence, so really supporting the local authorities. We're going to look at a tailor-made CRM software, which I'll talk a little bit about later on, and about procurement to make sure we get long-term quality outcomes and really make sure we learn the past lessons around ECO, EEC, CERT, Warm Front, for those of you that remember it, all those different things we've had in the past. It's make sure we take all that learning and take it forward to deliver a scheme that's really meaningful and makes a difference to the residents that we all serve. So for 2020, we're looking at interventions through existing channels, so existing funding, of which hopefully there will be a little bit more to the existing funding that we currently have. So we're looking at essentially a small admin team, call centre. I don't like to use the word call centre because it's so much more than that when you come to give energy advice. Ideally, if we can get the funding, what we'd like to be able to do is actually have someone based within each local authority, because that's one of the key areas. There is complete lack of capacity within local authorities. So they actually have a person that can help deliver this. And then, as I say, we're looking for 1,000 homes in 2020 and 6,000 per year for the following 4 years. We're looking investment-wise, 25 million for rapid upskilling, 50 million operating costs. So that's around making sure it's set up and running beyond 2021. Installation costs, 2 sets of costs, but the big one there is a 60 million cost for installations. So, boilers, insulation, all the exciting stuff, so that we can get those homes insulated. And the governance that will sit behind it, this is all, you know, still to be finalised, agreed. There's an awful lot of work still to be done at this, and there's an awful lot of task and finish groups that are out there working on that are led by the combined authority. But it's about establishing a combined authority owned, operated company, potentially, an independent board to make sure everything's in place, making sure we're collecting good quality data, linking with the universities, there's the combined authority universities, making sure we understand the customer experience and have a long-term programme, so it's not just a in and out as so many programmes have been in the past. Also, we want to make sure that we link the programmes through social housing. We've got over 120,000 homes that are managed by housing associations of some sort across the West Midlands, with a huge annual investment of stock. And it's really about how we work together, not only to deliver fuel poverty outcomes, but also to deliver a net zero plan going forward, which is, you know, what essentially we are all signed up to do as a goal as well. So just to give you an idea, just around scaling up of jobs, this is for solid wall insulation. So, you know, you're looking at, you know, £32 million a year if we are really trying to get on some of these targets that we're looking at. You're looking at labour costs, material costs, and potential huge number of job creation, and the larger supply chain that goes alongside that. So huge potential there for scaling up jobs. And I think not only scaling up, but also protecting the existing workforce. And there's probably many of you around the table that are aware already of really good heating engineers and insulation companies that are already making redundancies, or in fact are closing their doors for the final time, which is not only has an impact on them, but also has an impact on the people that we need them to support going forward. So hence why we want to get this ramped up as soon as we possibly can. So delivery wise, there are frameworks already in place. So it's about utilising some of those frameworks potentially. There might be some potential around existing contracts, ensuring that they are within existing procurement regulations. It's really looking about retrofit coordinators and training packages around that, so that there are routes in place to make sure that there are training opportunities, but also there's routes in place to ensure that we are installing the most appropriate measures in people's households. Many of you will have heard about retrofit coordinators, I'm sure, and retrofit assessors, but what their role is to make sure that any measure that is installed in someone's home is an appropriate measure alongside any other measures that might be appropriate. So they've worked very successfully. I think in London they did 1,200 properties utilising retrofit coordinators and assessors to make sure that the measures installed were not only appropriate but were done obviously within standards, but also to make sure from the householder perspective it worked for them as well. And actually it was, I think, having seen some of the reports, it was really interesting the huge issues around ventilation that came back from that project. So that alongside heating, there was a massive need around ventilation. So some really interesting areas of work. I think it links back to some of the discussions we're going to be having a bit later with Andy around making sure that any works that are done under the Green Homes grants, well, what we call them, I forgot what we're calling them, Green Homes grants, isn't it? Whatever funding we are looking to support householders with, is that it's the right sort of support, and the person that's doing the survey is impartial. And that's one of the key things around the retrofit coordinators. From what I've seen, the biggest challenge is there's probably not enough of them to deliver at the scale we need to. So that's just an aside there. So there's quite a lot of boxes there, just sort of showing what the different sort of working groups. What we certainly are encouraging is, if anyone's particularly interested in being involved in the process or working groups as well, we are constantly looking for additional feedback, additional support to make sure we've got all the I's and T's crossed and made to make sure we're looking at everything we possibly can look at. As you can see, there's a whole host of different skill groups looking at it, involving a whole host of different organisations, from the voluntary sector through to local authorities, through to contractors, through to energy suppliers, through to the universities, through to contractors, and also manufacturers as well. So the whole gambit hopefully is represented within one of those groups through the sort of interim coordination process. So one of the things I did mention was development of a CRM system. So many of you out there are part of the voluntary sector. We certainly, as an organisation, as Acton Energy, fit under that as well. And I know, I saw Marches on the line as well, who are very similar to us, that provide energy advice. And I know there's other charities out there, and we all have CRM systems to support householders. None of them are bespoke around the energy sector, so that's what we want to try and sort out. I think we've looked at over the last, well, I say the word we, I think Davina from Marches and Joe from Acton Energy have both been looking at a lot of different software options over the last few weeks, and it's really about making sure that we have a system that can really deliver what we want to deliver for a person-centered approach. So it's about having a database, one of a better way of describing that is person-centered, but also enables us to really look at the property and address the property issues, particularly around EPCs and SAP, but also really understanding the wider elements of that. So the cost savings by delivering certain household measures, the savings to the NHS for delivering certain measures, that to try and have a tool that we can develop. We've had funding from Innovate UK to do that, so we are currently in that process of developing that CRM system. And what we want to be doing over the next month or so is really working with people around the table here, particularly local authorities, about what your needs are, so that we have a system that enables us to really hit the ground running to deliver the scale of the programme that we're talking about in regards to having a West Midlands wide Warm Homes Save Lives programme. So what we're looking for with regards to the CRM, we're looking at existing systems that are out there. One of the things we're going to look at is the inclusion of an app for frontline workers, so that you can very easily download the app. It's already got your details in as a frontline worker, and then if you are in someone's home, you think, actually there's a real problem here, you can just click the button, we will call you and we can have a conversation with you about that householder. That's sort of the process behind it. We are going to be running some workshops specifically for local authorities in September, really to start to look at needs around this in regards to fuel poverty. What are your needs from a local authority perspective? What do you want to see if there's a CRM system? How does it work for you? We know what we need as advice agencies in regards to the the person-centred bit, but what other bits do you need as local authorities? We're certainly looking quite a lot of stock information will go in there. And then also we want to make sure it talks to other existing systems that may be out there operational across the current market. And the aim is to get that beta tested and done for that in October, with a live launch sort of end of October, November time, so that we can hopefully start with ourselves in March just to get the system up and operational, but ultimately available for local authorities to use as well. So anyone that is particularly interested in getting involved around the CRM work, then to email my colleague Joseph, and he will perhaps set up a date that we can talk to you a little bit more about what's available and how that process is going to work. So I think that's it from me. I've rattled through as per normal. So if I stop sharing, and then if anyone has any questions, I haven't been able to look at questions while I've been doing this at the same time. Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. That was really, really interesting. I love the idea of this kind of whole picture approach, this holistic approach, as they cliche say, especially looking at past schemes, where they've succeeded, where they failed, the pitfalls, the problems, and also looking, delving more deeply into local authorities, because I think as time has gone on, regardless of COVID, the fuel poverty commitment from local authorities, for a variety of quite legitimate reasons, has reduced. Certainly in Coventry, we don't have a fuel poverty team anymore, and I think that initiatives such as this could kickstart or reboot some of the local authority initiatives to tackle fuel poverty in its own right, rather than tacking it onto environmental enforcement or housing or whatever, which obviously have crucial roles to play. But I think there's a case for fuel poverty being a standalone function in local authorities rather than part of somebody else's. Anyway, if anybody has any questions, please put them onto the chat and we'll address them at a convenient time coming on. I think now's a convenient time for a break, so if we take 10 minutes, And when we come back, there will be you'll be seamlessly slipped into randomly assorted breakout rooms, and you will see, and there'll be some stuff posted on chat about the green, whatever Rachel called it and I call it, and we've all forgotten what it's called now, Green Homes Grant. This is very new, a very new thing. I'll be interested in your perspectives on this. So when you go into groups, can you, the normal thing, assign a scribe, and at the end of the 15 minutes, that scribe is to like just say a couple of words on a couple of issues, and we'll move through like that, but also have everything written down somewhere and send it to us so we can present it in its full when we circulate this, the details of this forum. So I'll repeat it when we come back, but just so you know, there'll be you'll be split into groups, all discussing the same thing, and you'll be asked to discuss for 15 minutes aspects to do with people, which are listed on something that will be published in a minute, and then for the next 15 minutes discuss aspects listed under the heading of structure. So the people is, you know, who's eligible, how do we choose them, what are the criteria, etc. Structure might be things like how do you choose suppliers, what's the security against rogue traders, how's the admin going to work, what about timescales, that kind of thing. Anyway, before we get onto that, we'll have a bit of a break. It's, by my watch, 11:15, which is fantastically on time. Thank you, Rachel. Great timekeeping. And if we can reconvene at 25 past on the dot, that'd be lovely. So go and have a cup of coffee and whatever, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Lots of nodding.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry we had to cut that quite short. It wasn't never ever long enough to talk out all the issues. As a general feeling, was that useful? Despite the fact it wasn't long enough, just kind of nod if you think that was an okay thing. Brilliant. There's lots of people without their screens on, so I can't see if they're nodding or not. You're nodding in darkness. So what will happen is, in a minute, I'll ask people to feedback on that. But if you've got any comments or anything that you didn't talk about, please email it to me or stick it on the chat now, but email it to me is fine. Gives you time to think a bit more about it. Anything that occurs to you afterwards would be great. And what I should do is I should collect all the comments that we're going to hear in a minute, plus all the emailed and other comments, and I'll put it in some kind of document and get it round to everybody. We had a really good chat in our room. Nowhere near touched on the tip of the iceberg, but we're getting somewhere. So can I ask, breakout room 1, who was the delegated scribe? Anybody there? Everybody's muted.
Andy, I wonder if I don't remember what number breakout room I was in, so maybe people don't know if they were in breakout room 1.
Okay, pretend we're breakout room 1 then. Davina, can you please feedback in
I
very
never
short
learn,
time?
do I? I just, you know, give me a gun and I'll shoot my
Thank
foot
you.
with it. Right, so we first established that we by no means know everything, and because we don't know everything, we are kind of doing a lot of guesswork and what ifs and so on. We suspect that not all of the details have been worked out yet, so I guess the first action is to just, you know, share any information that we get. So we were really, I don't think we really stuck to the kind of agenda all that much, but just to summarize, we were talking about whether it'd be channeled through contractors, because that would allow kind of speedy delivery potentially, but also a kind of focus on the low-hanging fruit. On that basis, then we felt that we should make contact with contractors that are likely to be involved, and just say that we want to work with them, and, you know, kind of as best we can make sure that those people who need it most do actually get it. There was also a kind of discussion about the role of local authorities, and the fact that they might be able to claim vouchers before the end of March, and so might not need to spend them by then, which gives us a little bit more time. So I think generally we thought that that would be positive if that were the case. Quality control and so on. Again, if it's driven by installers, that could be a bit of a worry. At this stage, I think the only thing we can say is that we will do our best to get in touch with our networks and let them know as much as we know, so that people, you know, if it is going through door knocking, try and get some messages about to customers. If it's through the website, then, you know, make sure people don't go answer the door knockers and so on. We don't really know how it's going to fit with eco. It probably not at all. Yeah, that's about it really, I think. Is that okay?
No, that's really good, Davina. Graham, do you have a question?
I did, thank you. And thanks for that, Davina. I think you'll probably find when the group that I was in feedback, some of the things will be similar, but I just wanted to pick on something you said there because it didn't come up in our group. I work for Warwick District Council, and I hadn't particularly picked up in any of this about the specific role for local authorities. I think you just said something about funding to local authorities through this. I just wondered if you could explain a little bit more.
Can I pass over to Sam, because I really don't know, and she was the one who mentioned it. Sorry, Sam, there we go.
Thanks, Davina. Yeah, you're outing me really, because I'm sure I've read something that said that the vouchers would be available to the individuals to apply online or via a local authority. So I don't have any specific details, just that I'd seen that mentioned somewhere. So I was hopeful that we would get at least a share of it to try and direct and target that funding. Okay.
Sorry, I just muted and unmuted myself in quick succession. I've no idea what I'm doing. Graham, while you're on the line, do you want to? Are you the scribe for your group, or?
Sorry, unmute. All this protocols about how you kind of unmute and mute on meetings, it's getting quite complicated, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, we didn't actually ascribe a scribe, but I am happy to kick off, and then obviously anyone join in. I mean, some of the specific issues that we picked up, I mean, many of the themes were actually things that Davina had just spoken about, and I won't focus on those, but the ones that we picked up particularly as challenges were firstly, one of the subtexts of this is that we just don't know enough. None of us know enough about this. Potential applicants don't know enough, potential suppliers don't know enough. To be honest, we feel that the government doesn't know enough about this because they're working this out in real time, aren't they? So we all need more information. But challenge we picked up is around, what does delivery by 31st of March 2021 mean? Does that mean delivery, you know, outcomes spent, etc., everything billed, or does it mean commitments? What does it mean? So that's going to be something that we need to pick up and understand early. Also, we're not sure what rules will be brought in around the definition of poorest households. And then the other one was, and it's not just that we didn't know, I don't think it's been announced, but, you know, so it's what this space, potential for scams, that was picked up by Davina and her group, and maybe some sort of potential for coordinated work there across organisations, just to, you know, if somebody's got some good information that they're sharing or sending out to residents, then that could perhaps be shared so we can coordinate that. And again, sorry, picked up by Davina and her group, potential or lack of links to other schemes, eco, that sort of stuff. You know, feel that's probably just, this is just going to fall into the category of just another scheme standing to one side, but obviously trying to achieve similar objectives. And then the final thing that we picked up, not really as a challenge, but just as a kind of, was, isn't it a shame, probably yet again, that we're not actually going to be able to measure the actual outcomes in terms of carbon savings or funding savings on this? And wouldn't it be lovely if, when £2 billion or however much money is, you know, given to projects like this, it would just be lovely if a tiny percentage could actually be allocated for that kind of work, because this is all principally, this one's brought forward because of kind of the COVID-19 crisis and trying to save jobs, which is wonderful. But it's all part of our commitments about carbon reduction and things like that, and fuel poverty. And yet again, we'll probably go into a scheme and actually not know what its outcomes are, which is a shame, but hey ho. Anybody else from my group that wants to join in? Anything I've obviously missed there?
I think we also mentioned about the scheme being falling into disrepute, you know, because we might get fraudulent contractors who might sort of ask for money up front. So I think we need some sort of awareness of avoiding, you know, people being sort of done out with, you know, and people giving out their money.
Okay.
Andy, I think you've gone on mute.
Oh, for goodness sake. I forgot what I said. I said, thank you, Celine. Thank you, Graham. That was very useful. Can we have another volunteer from another group, please? Something we haven't spoken about yet.
Hi, Andy. It's Rachel from
Rachel.
Action Energy. Hi. Yeah, I think we were group room 5. There you go. I did take a note of our number. We were room 5. Similar discussions to what everyone else has had, but we did talk about the fact that we are looking at 2 very separate schemes. So you're looking at a 5K scheme for the able to pay owner occupiers and landlords, which I have to say is a big question about that landlord element, because we did talk about security of tenancies, potential rate increases, multiple properties by landlords. What happens if the tenant of that landlord is a fuel poor householder? Do they fit into that able to pay side, or do they come into the fuel poverty side? And I think someone did mention about, you know, is the funding coming through to local authorities for that fuel poverty side or not? I think there's quite a lot of speculation there around, is this what HUGs should have been in the home upgrade grant scheme? Is this, you know, just a reallocation of that funding to a different area? If it is, then is that actually going to come through the energy hubs, of which, where was HUGs going to come through? You know, lots of different questions about there. We talked about standards, as everyone else has, about making sure that the work that installed is appropriate work, you know, the need to have proper assessments. And going back, I think, to what Graham was saying, you know, if we're going to have a property assessed by, needs to be, say, a retrofit assessor, a retrofit coordinator, then it enables you to actually do SAP assessment pre and post to give you some data. So I think that's really, really key. Otherwise, you know, we're spending all this money from an economics point of view, but actually we do need to have to see some outcomes and show that we are making a difference to these householders and actually achieving some targets. So I'd like to see Bays look at that, and I think we'll certainly be feeding that back from an Allier perspective. There was quite a lot of concern around the landlord side, I have to say. I think quality and appropriate of works, quality hopefully would be covered under Trustmark and PAS 2035. Appropriateness of works is a big one, because it does open us up to the risk of fraud. We did briefly talk about, you know, the challenges around eco and flex, you know, and ensuring the work is delivered based on a criteria there. So we just want to make sure that we learn the lessons from those schemes to make sure we deliver works that is suitable for the householder. So I think, I mean, we ran out of time basically. I think we could have talked an awful lot more, but I think that was kind of the key areas. I think local authority capacity actually is another one, actually, Andy, because a few local authorities, they were lucky enough to have officers looking at fuel poverty, but I think it can be quite a small part. So there is a need there potentially to, you know, for better resourcing of the local authorities if it's going to end up coming through local authorities, or an agency that runs it on their behalf. I don't know if anyone else from my group's got anything.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. Something we picked up on that perhaps we didn't mention was the, as you said, local authority capacity not to be able to deliver, even if they had the authority to, and that this actually might kickstart local authorities into concentrating on fuel poverty as a standalone rather than it being tacked onto other parts of the authority. Anyway, moving on. Next person, please. Okay. Has anybody got something to say that would like to contribute to this? You may already have been in a breakout room that's been represented. I don't know. It's entirely up to you. But if there's no more further stuff, then, well, has anybody else got something to say before we close?
Hello, Andy. I'm calling from the Neaton and Bedworth Borough Council. We had a session with a few others, but didn't actually have a chat about anything. I don't know why, but I agree with Rachel. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're a bit echoey, but you're fine. What's your name? Sorry.
Jack from the Neaton and Bedworth Borough Council.
Oh, hello.
Hello. There was a few of us supposed to be involved in that. Robin, myself, and Lorraine started off, but then no one was there. So I agree with Rachel on the LA commitment and yourself on that. I feel that energy seems to be a tag along, as you said, and it needs to be a standalone, dedicated role. Because I think we're quite sort of experienced in these projects, and really it needs commitment. So unless they designate that role to a person in particular, we can probably manage that a lot better. We know how all the networks work together. I agree with the landlord side of it as well. That's a bit of a grey area. I'm also concerned about this delivery taking place from September till March. What with COVID and everything else, I'm not sure how that's going to pan out. And even with the external wall insulation works, again, will that be people being signed up and then work being delivered later? So there was things of that. Other measures are quite easy to do, but maybe external wall insulation not. And I think there's only, what, over 600,000 eligible for this? Is that right? 600,000 people nationally?
Don't know.
Yeah, they were the only things I wanted to add.
Okay,
my understanding of that was that it's not necessarily 600,000 eligible. It's that if people took the maximum amount of money, that's how many could be funded through it. But that's just my understanding.
Right.
Okay, well, look, thanks everybody for that. As I've mentioned a couple of times, this is all being recorded. The breakout rooms weren't recorded, but the general forum stuff, including our chat now, is being recorded. This will all be made available and the links be forwarded to you. Generally, I think there are pros and cons to Zoom, as we've all spoken about a few times. I'm actually, I find it quite valuable to put names to faces, which you don't always get when you're talking to a crowd in a room, unless they say, my name's so-and-so, so that's great. I just want to finish now with a couple of bits of news that I picked up recently, just for general interest. One is the End Fuel Poverty Coalition has warned that 200,000 households potentially extra could be in fuel poverty in the very near future. I was going to say when coronavirus is finished, but that's a silly thing to say. The way they work this out is that unemployment is due to rise from 1.29 million to 3.08 million, apparently, by late 2020. That's 1.17 million households will have an unemployed person in them. And according to well-versed statistics, 30% of houses with unemployed people in, at least one, will most likely be in fuel poverty. So extrapolating all that, that means an extra 200,000 households in fuel poverty by the end of the year. That's a guess. Could be more, could be less. If we have a rubbish winter, it could be even worse. So, and the other bit of news that I picked up on was that although smart meter installations increased in June compared with May, they are still down overall from last year. But that's to be expected, and we hope that that will pick up. Okay, that's about it from me. So thanks all of you ever so much for coming along today, virtually. And to Brian and Mike, who did all the background twiddling of knobs and were on the virtual mixing desk, as it were. I haven't got a clue about all this stuff. I just do what I'm told. So, and I hope to see you again in person with real coffee, real biscuits. But if that doesn't happen, it will be again in virtual form. Okay? And please email me with your feedback from everything. Either you thought this was rubbish, you thought it was good bits, bad bits, I want to know everything. Warts and all, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Sorry,
thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Cheers.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.